Thank you, thank you. Good morning, good morning. I am delighted to be with you today. My sermon for today is Finding Stillness in the Storm. And we're going to start with our scripture reading. Our first one comes from the Bible, from Psalms 46, 1 through 3. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. And from the Dhammapada 96. The one whose mind is calm, whose speech and actions are calm, who is freed through true understanding, is perfectly peaceful. So let us take a breath in together. And as we exhale, let us settle into the sacred space just a little bit more. Heart, body, and mind. Today we are talking about finding stillness in the storm. And I would suspect all of us have experienced storms in our lives. Some of them are weather-related, and some of them are people-created, and some happen just because. And they come seemingly out of nowhere. I used to think that strength meant learning how to withstand the storm or somehow be stronger than the storm. What I have discovered is that true strength is learning how to cultivate stillness and inner peace in the midst of the storm. It's kind of like standing in the eye of the hurricane. Everything is whirling about, and yet in the center, it is always still and quiet. The law of freedom reminds us that we have God's gift of freedom. We have God's gift of free will and personal responsibility, and that gives us the power to choose how we will meet the storm. The storms that show up in our lives may not be our choice, but who we become in response to those storms is our choice. Today, I would like to share 3 spiritual truths for cultivating stillness when the storms of life come our way. Our first spiritual truth is that stillness is a choice. Have you ever known someone who walks into a room and just begins creating storms and chaos? Okay, good, I'm not alone. They tell gossipy stories, they make nothing-burger events into full-on emotionally triggering dramas. It's almost like they are trying to create their own version of a reality TV show. And I don't know about you, but for me, it can be exhausting. While we cannot always control who or what comes into our lives, we can become more discerning about what we allow in our lives. And not every storm deserves a seat at our table. I was recently having coffee with someone that I've known for quite a while. And over the years, we have met for coffee and conversation. This past year, we've been having coffee more regularly. And I started to notice that during these conversations, there were always dramas and stories about other people. In one of our most recent conversations, the drama and story unexpectedly became about me. It was surprising, and I felt as if I was being interrogated and guilt-tripped for choices that I've made in my life. And it was a lot. I admit I was very relieved when that coffee cup was empty and that conversation was over. I went out and sat in my car for a long time after that conversation, trying to process what had just happened. My mind walked back through the conversation. I knew that what I was being blamed for was not true and not my responsibility. But the conversation still bothered me. Over the next few days and weeks, I thought about it a lot. It kept bubbling up. And honestly, then I just got mad because I was annoyed and I was tired of thinking about it. And then I realized I was not the only person that this was happening to. I remember during previous coffee chats, she would tell me similar stories about interactions with other people, and it mirrored what had just happened to me. And in that moment, I realized I had a choice. And I needed to ask myself, does this belong at my table? And the answer that came back resounding was a no, it does not. And I will admit, I struggled with that answer. I knew it was the right choice for my inner peace and for cultivating my capacity for stillness. But because we had been friends for a long time, I felt an obligation to the relationship. There is a quote by Viktor Frankl that I love. This is from his book, The Doctor and the Soul, and it says, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Stillness is a choice. In fact, it is an act of spiritual sovereignty. It is something we cultivate and practice, and it is up to you and me to decide who and what belongs at our table. That brings us to spiritual truth number 2. Guidance is always available. During the fall, there is a hurricane season in the southeastern United States. Yes, I'm aware of it. I survived one of those hurricanes. And here's what's interesting. When the hurricanes start to form, the news starts talking about them. A few weeks before the hurricane makes landfall, it becomes headlines for local and national news. They bring in experts to talk about it. They show satellite images of it. Computer models begin predicting where it's going to go and the potential for damage. And as it gets closer, the warnings begin. People are encouraged to buy supplies, board up their windows, fill their gas tanks, evacuate, get to higher ground, and do it while the roads are still open. Some people listen and take action. Some people decide to wait and see. Others mix up a cocktail, affectionately known as a hurricane, and dare the storm to come their way. And here's what I find most interesting about this. Everyone has access to the same information, the same updates, the same warnings, and yet they all make individual choices. We also have constant updates and guidance from Spirit. Sometimes we have difficulty tuning in because our inner waters are stirred up by worry, busyness, fear, distractions, cocktails, other people's stories and dramas, and maybe even our own stories and dramas. I love this quote from the Tao Te Ching. This is from chapter 15. It says, "Do you have the patience to wait until your mud settles and the water is clear?" We can help our mud to settle by cultivating stillness so that we can feel the guidance of Spirit. This may come as a quiet nudge, a feeling that something isn't quite right, a conversation that keeps returning to our thoughts, a dream we can't quite forget, a passage from a sacred text that seems to be written just for today, a friend who gently asks the exact question we needed. Based on the law of freedom, Spirit will always guide us, but will never force us. Guidance is one of Spirit's greatest gifts, and stillness is how we learn to recognize it. That brings us to spiritual truth number 3. Storms leave behind gifts. Storms can make a mess. They're awful, and yet they can also uncover blessings and unveil wisdom for us. They might reveal strengths, priorities, resilience, what really matters, and who shows up. I would like to tell you a story about my great Aunt Ida. I love my great Aunt Ida. The last time we visited my great Aunt Ida, she was 85 years old and still living on the family farm in New Mexico, in the farmhouse where she was born. We were the city cousins, and we would come to visit every couple of years. Aunt Ida loved my mom, and my mom loved Aunt Ida. And we would usually only stay a couple of nights, so in Mom's words, we didn't wear Aunt Ida out. As a kid watching Aunt Ida, I couldn't imagine she ever got tired. She moved with the speed and determination of a firecracker with every task she did. I can remember waking up to the smell of bacon frying. Oh, and the farm eggs from her chickens tasted so good, like way better than the eggs we got at home. And Aunt Ida would tell us it's because she loved her chickens. And I believed her. Aunt Ida loved her life on the farm. I would listen as she and my mom would chat and catch up on family news. My sister and I would play on the porch nearby. And even when the neighbors or the family members would do things that made Aunt Ida mad, she was always quick to forgive and find something to be grateful for. She was strong and resilient and independent, and I admired her. She was living life on her own terms. One afternoon, while Mom and Aunt Ida were chatting on the porch and my sister and I were playing nearby, Aunt Ida suddenly stopped and rubbed her arms. She stood up and said, "Girls, gather up your toys and get inside." Then she took off running towards the barn, and my mom took off after her. I looked up and saw dark clouds on the horizon. My sister and I quickly gathered up our toys and went inside. Together, Mom and Aunt Ida shooed and scooped up the animals into the pens and the stalls, secured the doors and windows in the barn, and ran back towards the house. As they were closing the doors and windows in the house, I could see the storm clouds coming. We all climbed up into Aunt Ida's bed together and pulled up the big quilt. I asked Aunt Ida how she knew the storm was coming. She told me God gave me an early warning system. The hair on my arm stands up anytime something bad is coming. Just then, the rain and the wind began pounding against the house, so hard I couldn't hear anything else Aunt Ida said. I noticed my mom was praying. Aunt Ida was holding her Bible. My sister and I were holding on to each other, and we scooched down under the big quilt a little more between Mom and Aunt Ida. As the rain and the wind began to slow down and then stopped, I asked Aunt Ida if the storm was over. She ran her hand over her arm and she said, "Not yet." And she was right. Pretty soon, another round of wind and rain started, pummeling the house. After the storm finally finished and moved on, we followed Aunt Ida outside to survey the damage. Everything was wet and muddy, and it was a mess. We went to the barn. The animals were all okay. We came back to the house and circled around it. No damage there. The house was okay too. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief. Then Aunt Ida went over to the water barrel and lifted the lid. She said, "Thank goodness for the rain. The water tank was almost empty and now it's full." I sat there just amazed. My Aunt Ida is someone who had learned how to be steady during the storms. And not because her life was easy, it wasn't. And not because she didn't feel fear, but because somewhere deep inside, she had cultivated a stillness, a faith and trust that chaos and storms could not touch. I love this quote by Eckhart Tolle. He says in his book, Stillness Speaks, "You find peace not by rearranging the circumstances of your life, but by realizing who you are at the deepest level." As we begin to close, a gentle call to action. Hurricanes have an eye, a center, a place of remarkable stillness. The goal of spiritual living is not avoiding the storms. It is learning how to pay attention to our early warning signs and cultivate the stillness in the center of our being so we become the I and not the storm. Because life will spin and chaos will happen and circumstances will change and plans will unravel, but there is a place within you that remains untouched and unmoved. A place of strength, a place of wisdom, a place of stillness. And the law of freedom reminds us that we can choose again and again to return to stillness and the wisdom of spirit. As we come to the end of our teaching, I would like to revisit our scripture readings from the Dhammapada 96. The one whose mind is calm, whose speech and actions are calm, who is freed through true understanding, is perfectly peaceful. And Psalms 46, 1 through 3. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. With our scriptures in mind, I would like to offer a closing affirmation. True strength is learning to cultivate stillness in the midst of the storm. So the next time life begins to spin around you, pause, breathe, listen, gather close what matters most, and trust the wisdom within. May you find stillness and blessings in the storm. May you trust the guidance of spirit. And may you use the sacred law of freedom to choose a life you love living. And so it is. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.